Continuing in John chapter 9, verses 24 through 41, let us listen that this may be for us God's word. So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I don't know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know. Though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to the one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sin, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking to you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to him, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So you may have noticed we jumped into this gospel reading somewhat in the middle. This is very characteristic of John. I told you at the very beginning of Lent, he loves to have these incredibly long, drawn-out narratives. If you were here in worship last week for Emily's incredibly powerful sermon, she read the entire chapter of chapter 4, this really long, drawn-out narrative of Jesus at the well with this Samaritan woman, all of his action back and forth and all of these things. John is a very slow burn kind of a gospel. He takes his time as he moves through these stories, which is, if we compare it, for instance, to the Gospel of Mark, is the complete opposite. Everything in Mark happens immediately. It's moving so quickly. But John forces us to slow down, helps us to see these deep encounters that people have with Jesus, and it is through the depth of these encounters, through these long, drawn-out narratives, that we see how people's minds and hearts are broken open by their encounter with Jesus. We see them confronting and being confronted by those beliefs that they've made their box around Jesus, they've made their box around God, and they think they've got it all figured out. They say, "Of course, we see. We're the important ones. We've got the name, we've got the recognition, we've got the prestige, we've got the power. Of course, we can see." But Jesus, exactly as we talked about with the kids, flips everything upside down. There is a way in which literally looking at the world upside down can be a helpful thing for us to reestablish our bearings, to help us to see exactly how it is that Jesus is calling us and to whom he is calling us. What we missed in the first 12 verses or so of this passage is, as I said to the kids, Jesus and his disciples are just kind of walking along. They see a man on the side of the road, and somehow they know that he was born blind. This is just something they somehow just seem to know. There's no information given, but they ask Jesus this very direct question: who sinned that this man was born blind? Was it he or his parents who sinned? Now, first of all, it's just a strange question to let's recognize that. Primarily the question about, was it he who sinned, and that's why he was born blind? I'm not sure how that would work chronologically. Perhaps he did some kind of mortal sin in the womb. I don't think that's possible, but it's a strange question. But what it points us to, and I think is the more important thing, what it points us to is the desire that the disciples have, in this case, and what I think points to a much deeper human desire and human tendency is to put blame somewhere, to say that something must have gone wrong here. Someone must be at fault. There must be someone who did something wrong, and that's why this man was born this way. Jesus' response is very straightforward. He says, neither this man nor his parents sinned. And then he adds, he was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. Now, that response on some level is kind of beautiful, because we might take this to mean, okay, well, yes, this man was born blind. He was born with this physical disability, but only so that Jesus could eventually heal him and have this incredible demonstration of God's power, which is a beautiful, wonderful thing about this text, the way that Jesus heals him and helps restore him. But I also want us to pause and recognize that I don't think this is exactly what Jesus is saying. I don't think, in other words, Jesus is saying, there was something wrong with this man, and now I am going to fix him and make him whole. In other words, when Jesus says that God's works might be revealed in him, again, we immediately all run to the miracle. We run to the healing of his eyes, the opening of his eyes, and say, oh, that must be what Jesus means by the works of God being revealed in him. But I wonder if what Jesus is pointing the disciples, and therefore us, to instead is a deep recognition of how the works of God are already demonstrated in the body of this blind man. For the disciples, they look at him and they see a problem. They see that something has gone wrong. They see a disability, in other words. And they say, this poor man, right? They take pity on him and say, something must have gone wrong. But again, perhaps what Jesus is saying is, what if there's nothing wrong with this man to begin with? What if the problem is not his physical blindness, but the blindness of the community that he lives in, that has forced him to the margins, that has forced him to the side, that has forced him into a position where he cannot be a full participating member of his own community? When Jesus heals this man, as every time Jesus heals anybody in the Gospels, there is that level of the personal, individual healing, but far more important is the attempted restoration of community, the restoration of wholeness. It is not simply about one person experiencing healness. It is opening up the eyes of all in the community so that they can hopefully then embrace that person and recognize, what were we thinking pushing this person away? What were we thinking assuming that there was something wrong with this man in the first place? But of course, it doesn't always work like that. Because again, we have this propensity to want to say, there is something wrong here, and it's someone's fault. I know whose fault it is. Think about what happens every time there is a devastating hurricane, wildfire, some kind of big natural disaster. Invariably, there will be some Christians who will tell you exactly why that earthquake, that hurricane, that whatever hit that particular place and is affecting those particular people, because they're sinners. They've done wrong, and this is how God operates. But Jesus, this door should have been slammed shut for us. He made it very, very clear. This is not how God works, but instead, again, is trying to open us to the recognition of the beautiful diversity of humanity and how the works of God are demonstrated in every single person that we meet. We might see people with varying abilities, whether we're thinking physically, cognitively, whatever. We might see those different, we talk about spectrums a lot, right? We think about different kinds of spectrums. And unfortunately, for many, many of us, there is only small space on these various spectrums that we've created to where we are willing to recognize the full humanity of those people that we talk about. Again, whether we're talking about physical ability, whether we're talking about cognitive ability, whether we're talking about spectrums when it comes to sexual orientation and gender identity, those kinds of things. We have said you have to look a particular way, you have to be a particular way in order for us to recognize the image of God in you. And again, I think Jesus is saying, we have got to get rid of that. We have to recognize how the image of God, how the work of God is being demonstrated through each and every person that we meet, that we are called to recognize in every person the face of Christ. And if we can't, Jesus calls that blindness. Sure, physical blindness, I get it. That can be a challenge. But the real blindness that Jesus is concerned with is the blindness that we carry in our hearts, the blindness through which we see the world, which will not allow us to see the beauty and the wonder of God demonstrated through these diverse spectrums of humanity, through the diverse spectrum of creation. Look around. Have you noticed the greens are a little greener right now, right? They're getting that bright, beautiful springtime glow where, it can just knock your socks off. Yet how blind are we to that beauty? How often do we just drive down the road or walk down the street and not even notice what it is that God is doing all around us? If we're looking for where we are in this story, we're probably not the man born blind. We're probably not the people who are around who are confused, who don't know what to make sense of it. We're probably a lot more like the Pharisees. Almost every time we read a story like this, where there are some arrogant, let's say, religious folks who come along with all the answers, they're us, okay? We love to make it about them, about other people. Oh, it's those other Christians who think this way. Or maybe it's those people of that other religion, or atheists, or whomever. It's always us. We are the ones who think that we've got all these questions answered, we've got it all figured out, but Jesus is always destabilizing what we think is certain. That is why the box has to break. That is why it has to be broken open so that we can see the works of God revealed in every square inch of creation. Jesus often says, for those who have eyes to see. That is the blindness that he's talking about here. That is the blindness that he is trying to cure all of us from, so that there is no longer a community or a society or a culture where someone who is born different from the quote-unquote norm is cast to the side and told that they do not matter. This text in particular is one that is very profound and powerful for me. I'll get choked up just thinking about it. It always makes me think about my friend John. This was in seminary. It was my first semester of seminary. We had spent the summer working on Greek, our Greek intensive course. You know, it's trial by fire, it's crazy, it's intense. And then in the fall, we all take a Greek exegesis course where we, whatever class is a particular book of the Bible, and then we spend the whole semester slowly translating that book from Greek to English. And then in class, we go line by line around the room, reading our translations, and then correcting each other, debating, well, no, this is a past participle, and blah, all of those kinds of things, right? And so we're reading through this text. My exegesis course was on the Gospel of John, and it was such a joy. And we're reading through this text. As you might imagine, it took us a few weeks because it's a very long text. But we get to this point in the text where the parents show up. And the parents in this story have always broken my heart because they don't know how to respond. They don't know how to deal with what has happened to their son and now this basically interrogation scene that has unfolded around them. And so when people ask them what they think of it or what they make of it, what kind of sense they make of it, they simply say, we don't know either. We don't understand ourselves. He is of age. Go ask him. And at the time, I was still a relatively new father. Our oldest daughter, Maya, was barely 1 year old, and I'm still in that very, kind of fresh-eyed father place. And I made a comment in class similar to this. I cannot understand parents who would seemingly abandon their child like that. I get that they don't understand, but how do they just offload these people onto him and point them back in his direction? And, so I made this comment, and then my friend John, who was sitting to my right, he said, I do, I get it. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, you're younger than I am, you're single, and you don't have kids. You have nothing to teach me about parenting, right? I had this immediate scoff internally, like, oh, okay, this guy's going to tell me something. And he said, when I was in high school and I came out as gay, my church did not know what to do with me. It was a huge deal. It was this huge fight within the church of what do we do with this kid? He is clearly a sinner, right? And he said even his parents, and this was the important part, even his parents, they were so confused. They didn't know how to make sense of it themselves. And so when people would come to them and say to them, what is going on? with your son? What are we supposed to do about this? They would say almost this exact thing. We don't know either. We don't understand either. Go ask him. He's old enough. He's in high school. He's old enough. Go talk to him. And it was this powerful, heartbreaking reminder that for so many people who, again, are born with one slight little difference in who they are, whether in their body, whether in their personalities, who they are told that they no longer belong. They no longer reflect the image of God with which they were born. That experience for me, because at that time, I didn't know how I felt about all of those quote-unquote issues either. I didn't know. We were in a different place within the church. I was in a different place in my own faith. And in that moment, it was as if my heart got ripped wide open, and I recognized I have been these blind Pharisees for far too long in my own life. I recognized that I am someone who is sitting in this classroom who cannot articulate a clear call to ministry. I was struggling big time with my sense of call to ministry, and yet I had several classmates like John who were obviously called to ministry, gifted for ministry, had a very clear sense of how God was calling them, and they are lost to the Presbyterian Church forever because at that time there was no path to ordination for them because of one thing about who they were. They're serving faithfully in other denominations, thanks be to God, but we lost out on the privilege of being led by those people because we were stuck in that place of blindness, because I, too, was stuck in that place of blindness. When we encounter Jesus, when we allow him to break open the box of our hearts, the box that we seek to contain him in, just like the Pharisees did, when we allow him to do that work within us, we cannot help not only for the box to be broken wide open, but for our hearts to be broken wide open, to be drawn more deeply into the mystery of God's love, which is so far beyond our imagination, so far beyond our ability to articulate. The call for us is always, always, always to see in the ways of Jesus. And I'm going to end exactly where Vivian left us. Look at the world upside down. If we can look at the world upside down, then we will come to know the priorities that Jesus has for us. Then we will know to whom we are being called. Then we will know how we are being called. Because the world as it is upside down, right? So for us to live according to the model of Jesus, it means looking at the world again from that upside down position so that we can recognize how God is moving and through whom. To the God of all grace, in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen.